Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. Eleanor N. headed to the coffee machine to make herself a double portion of the hot, strong drink she jokingly called her savior. A night shift with the ambulance crew awaited her. She still hadn't learned to sleep in snatches, half an hour between calls. What kind of rest was that? Only Livy, the quick-witted nurse with whom the children's ambulance doctor had been through many difficult moments, could joke about sleep. "Uncle Reuben's come to visit again, chopping me down even on the go," she'd say. Ellie herself couldn't force herself to drink coffee anymore, and energy drinks in bright cans, alas, didn't help, and their composition was, to put it mildly, questionable. When a small patient's life hung by a thread, balancing over an abyss, Olivia knew how to instantly pull herself together. Eleanor N. was amazed every time. Iron nerves, iron character, a phrase came to mind, from a cartoon or an old song. To herself she mentally added, and a heart of gold, so huge it holds love for the whole world. After returning from another call, Livy and their driver Greg would fall asleep as soon as their heads touched the pillows on the couches in the break room. But the senior member of their crew, Eleanor N., always remained alert, in full readiness. Ellie wrapped her hands around the steaming cup, blissfully inhaled the familiar aroma, and thought with pleasure, "I'll come home after the shift, and there'll be nothing to cook. A couple of cutlets and leftovers from yesterday's mashed potatoes are waiting in the fridge. My husband Vince left for a business trip this morning. 3 days of culinary freedom." The woman stretched her legs onto the coffee table, watching her assistants peacefully dozing under the monotonous hum of the air conditioner. It had been a hot summer, and the unit had been running non-stop for days, as if exhausted. Where did its mechanical motor find the strength? Gregory softly snored in his sleep. Everyone at the station knew about his tender feelings for Livy, but for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to confess. A big man, nearly 2 meters tall, who had served in hot spots under contract, who had lost his wife after his injury when she left, not wanting to see a man with a scar across his cheek beside her. In the presence of the lively nurse, the seasoned Gregory turned into a shy youth, mumbled in response to her questions, and flushed red at accidental touches. Eleanor N. smiled, remembering how her Vinny had circled around her almost 20 years ago, full of interest. He approached her in the park one spring day as she was cramming Latin, preparing for a medical institute exam. "May I sit here? Is the spot on the bench next to you taken?" Pretty fair-haired Ellie flashed her gray-green eyes at him and pulled her thick briefcase full of textbooks closer. "And why don't you like the neighboring benches? There are so many empty spots there." "This bench suits my pants," the stocky guy Vince mumbled and immediately turned crimson. "Then my arguments are exhausted," the girl laughed. "Let's introduce ourselves, shall we? I see you're unlikely to decide on that yourself." Extending a palm sweaty with excitement, the guy said, a little scared, "Vincent, or just Vince." He didn't shake Ellie's hand, but frantically wiped the moisture on his light summer trousers. Ellie lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, "And I'm Eleanor, Ellie for short. Sometimes friends call me Ellie Bean." The nickname, which had stuck to her since childhood, instantly diffused the tense atmosphere. Vinny smiled happily and said, "I'd like to earn the right to call you Ellie Bean, too. That means becoming your friend. And let's use you informally." "Let's do it," the girl replied. "Why all these formalities at our age?" That day, Ellie had to hurry back to the dormitory to have a fresh head for the boring Latin exam tomorrow. They agreed with Vincent that he would wait for her by the institute. If she passed successfully, they would go for ice cream and pastries at the confectionery on the boulevard. A red signal lit up on the ambulance console. The dispatcher quickly typed something on the computer, simultaneously making notes in the log. Crew for a call. Address. Gregory's. Sent the attachment. Hurry. House on the outskirts. Little girl is suffocating. Parents can't understand the cause of the attack. Quickly putting on her medical uniform, Olivia was already rushing down from the second floor. Eleanor N. I grabbed the case, even managed to shove your paper folder next to it. Let's not waste a minute. I have a feeling it's serious. Quickly getting into the ready-to-go vehicle, the friendly trio, led by Eleanor N., set off. The night city was slowly cooling down after the daytime heat. Gregory sometimes felt that the softened asphalt was even melting under the wheels of the old Gazelle van. But there was no time to think about it. He drove the car carefully and quickly. If the road remained this empty, they would arrive in about an hour. Eleanor N., sitting next to the driver, thought, I should have put Olivia and Greg together. At this hour, while Gregory drove at maximum speed, Olivia in the back compartment was lost in sad thoughts. She had 30 years behind her, not the easiest ones, an orphan since the 3rd grade. Her family was that rare case when, one autumn evening, it wasn't the father, but the mother who disappeared from home. It all started when the woman, her mother, left. She fell in love with a young colleague cook and followed him to the ends of the earth, if necessary, and wasn't going to Norilsk for 5 years as a production manager in a new restaurant the end of the earth. After such a betrayal by his wife, Olivia's father seemed to go mad with grief. He systematically destroyed any images of his wife. He tore wedding photos, standing on the dresser and behind glass in the wall unit, to shreds. He wiped away any reminders of his mother in the bathroom. Accidentally dropping an old perfume bottle, forgotten by his wife on the shelf, it shattered with a quiet chime on the tile. And the man just stood there and crushed the shards with his feet, as if trying to grind the remnants of his tender affection into the floor. The bathroom smelled persistently of Mom for a long time afterward. Olivia was only 10 years old then. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mother had left her with her dad, without even saying goodbye. The word love was unfamiliar to her. Her parents hadn't shown much romance in front of her. They were reserved and businesslike. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather, what she remembered of it, Olivia made a vow to herself. I will cherish my chosen one. I won't repeat my parents' mistakes. The girl's father drowned his sorrow in an unusual way. He didn't seek solace in alcohol, but threw himself into work. He was a plumber. Such a virtuoso that his waiting list was booked months in advance if an expensive bathtub or toilet needed to be installed perfectly in an elite apartment without scratching a single side. No one around even suspected that the master had set an ambitious goal: to accumulate immense wealth, fly to his wife in Norilsk, and prove to her that he was the one beloved man from whom one does not leave. In a beautiful tin box from under Nut Halva, the master collected banknotes of various denominations, denying himself everything, even a couple of rubles for beer. The stack of bills grew, became thicker, pleasantly heavy in his hand. Meanwhile, the one he dreamed of, up north, finding herself in an unfamiliar environment with cold realities, couldn't bear it. What happened was annoyingly simple. Neighbors who had recently arrived with her just shook their heads upon learning that she decided to walk just a couple of blocks home in a fierce blizzard without a work car. Olivia's mother got lost in the snow trap. After just a couple of steps, the snow didn't fall but descended in a dark, icy, penetrating swarm. Her breath was caught, as if someone had hit her under the knees. Exhausted, she sank into a snowdrift. She had no strength left to call for help. When an hour later, her worried partner didn't find his girlfriend at home, he organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She died later in the hospital quietly. The Southerner couldn't withstand pneumonia. That's how Olivia became a half-orphan, but they learned about it much later. The story of Olivia's father is worthy of a detective novel. After his wife's sudden flight, he worked obsessively for a year. Finally, he accumulated enough money to bring his wife back. He got himself in order. But there were no direct flights from their city to the north. He had to take a train to a large airport. His fellow travelers in the compartment seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag, the name of which he couldn't even pronounce. He had Ossetian pies from the bakery near his home, a couple of his favorite lemons, and a chocolate bar. Olivia's father had a terrible sweet tooth. They had dinner soulfully. He didn't even immediately realize that he was drifting somewhere. His thoughts became hazy. He completely relaxed. He began telling his new friends the story of his life. Even tears welled up. When the neighbors suggested a few games of simple Durac, he didn't suspect he was so easily excited. He had held cards in his hands no more than a dozen times in his life. So when they remarked, "Well, you're something. You've already managed to mess us up. If we have to play for money with you, you lucky guy, you'll leave us all without pants here in no time," he reacted with enthusiasm. Who would refuse to easily replenish their money bag? They threw 10 rubles each into the pot. A funny amount, just for kicks. Before the eyes of the ill-fated traveler, the paper pictures with kings and queens spun like a mystical trick. You just had to figure out what to throw onto the table from the fan of colorful portraits. He lost the first 1,000 purely out of interest, for a little thrill. How that amount increased 100-fold in just an hour, he couldn't even comprehend. His head felt like lead. His eyes were heavy. He desperately wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard, sinking into a viscous slumber, was, "Alex." Then silence and darkness. For some reason, it seemed to him that he was no longer in the compartment on the cozy bed made by the conductor, but swaying with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp screech, cold wind, damp drops of rare rain on his face. A flight. Olivia's father's body was found a couple of weeks later in the thickets by the road quite by chance, between two settlements near the railway tracks. Even rare mushroom pickers avoided these places. But a couple in love wandered here. They arrived on bicycles, seeking solitude away from prying eyes. They were going home to the village. Their attention was drawn to a red fabric in the bushes, which turned out to be a sports bag. Then there was a long process of identification and searching for relatives. That's when it became clear that Olivia's mother was also no longer alive. The fate of the money intended for the reunion and how the man ended up by the tracks remained a mystery. The person simply disappeared. Olivia, left with a kind neighbor during her father's absence, was sent to an orphanage by the guardianship authorities. New walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. While other children in the state institution became withdrawn, she, on the contrary, blossomed, opening up to peers and educators. In studies and all activities, the active Livy with light hair, caramel-colored brown eyes, and a slender figure was always at the forefront. Her favorite subjects were biology and chemistry. Her hobby was participating in theatrical productions. But even in sports competitions and hikes, you couldn't find a better little nurse among the girls. During one school outing, Olivia's classmate stepped on a rusty nail. A bad spot? A bad wound? Even the gym teacher and the young educator were flustered. It was more than a kilometer to the camp with the experienced elderly doctor. Martha P. blood gushed from the wound like a fountain, scarlet, bubbling. For a few seconds, Olivia, along with the others, examined the injury. Then they couldn't even explain how the fearless girl quickly applied a tourniquet above the wound, using some rope that appeared as if from nowhere, and even shouted to the stunned onlookers, "Note the time of application, and a note here." Instantly, she tore her cotton shirt into bandages, commanding, "First aid kit, quickly. See what there is for disinfection, since someone forgot to put fresh bandages." A little later, the startled gym teacher was already draping his windbreaker over the girl's shoulders, leaving her in just a thin top. With the help of 2 students, he fashioned a makeshift stretcher from branches. The guy could barely walk, limping and wincing in pain. Back at the orphanage, in the medical room, Martha P. told Olivia after the ambulance left, "I heard praise from the doctors that the first aid was given so skillfully. But it's you who should be praised, not me, the old crow. I didn't oversee the first aid kit properly before the hike. Shame on me. Where did you get such knowledge, child?" Olivia laughed and replied, "I'm surprised myself. Firstly, I love medical shows. Secondly, it's as if an inner voice tells me, 'Take this and do it like that.'" Thus, it became clear that Olivia would choose her profession not out of the necessity of mandatory education after the orphanage, but by the calling of her heart. The gazelle van with the medical crew laboriously climbed a small rise at the end of the street and stopped at the house at Pechatnaya 10. Eleanor N. deftly picked up the case, walked quickly to the gate. Olivia, delayed for a couple of seconds, was already standing behind her, as usual, covering her back. An old copper doorbell was visible on the wooden gate, and Ellie thought, "Some kind of rarity, probably hasn't worked in ages." But the doorbell didn't fail, announcing the deserted street in the pre-dawn silence with a clear ring. Confident footsteps were heard behind the gate, and the next moment it swung open. A silent scene. Spectators could have stood up and burst into applause. Standing before Eleanor N. was her husband Vincent in person, who had left for a business trip that morning. Seeing his wife, the husband said in a stammering voice, "Please come in. The girl is in the house in the back room." Ellie and Olivia rushed towards the house. Hammers were pounding in the former's head. All questions later, now only the girl and her life. But what does this mean? Why is Vinny here? What connects him to this little one? In the vestibule, there was a persistent smell of dusty mats piled by the door. The general neglect that seemed to constantly reign here was striking. In the next room, the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had been reheated more than once, and a little cinnamon lingered. The little patient was lying on a small sofa. Next to her, a young woman with a somewhat exotic appearance was pacing nervously. Seeing the mother, Ellie was truly taken aback. Dreadlocks of tangled hair the color of acid fuchsia, eyes heavily lined with black. Below, jeans with huge holes in the knees. Above, a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern. The thought fluttered in her head again, like a helpless bird. Vince? What is her Vince doing here? A lover of impeccable cleanliness and classic style in clothing. By definition, he cannot be here. But he was standing next to her, looking at her with the pathetic eyes of a sick dog. Olivia felt the absurdity of the situation and commanded loudly, "Everyone step back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, Mom, quickly tell us what happened." The little one lying on the pillow was so much like Vince that Ellie's heart almost stopped. It definitely missed a couple of beats. It became clear that the larynx was affected, angioedema. The girl was barely breathing. There were traces of hives on her face. The little one involuntarily reached for the spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Vinny took it upon himself to answer the medic's questions. It was as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over Eleanor N., and he immediately, as if stepping into a whirlpool. "My daughter and I were at the circus today. They are touring with small ponies. Our girl is crazy about horses. In the second act, when the pony show started, Alice began to cough, and then her face started to swell right before my eyes. I immediately knew something was wrong. We went to the first aid station. They gave her an antihistamine. The swelling disappeared instantly. We went home. At first, everything was normal at home, but then Allie started wheezing. I found sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when she was riding a pony during the intermission, she picked up a handful of chopped wooden blocks from the floor. She was smelling them all the time to remember how beautiful the horse was. I assume it's a severe allergy. Ellie listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. My daughter and I went home. Vince said these words. How was this possible? For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes, and she met Olivia's gaze. And Olivia understood. The doctor was unwell. Their Eleanor N. was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Olivia knew her boss's husband. Undoubtedly, she understood that her doctor mentor knew nothing about her husband's child from another woman. With a decisive movement, the nurse seated Eleanor N. on a chair, waved a cotton ball with ammonia under her nose, and said just a few words. Suspicion of Quink's edema. We'll get her to the hospital. The doctor nodded resignedly. The condition is serious. Hope bronchospasm doesn't start. Liv, prepare epinephrine and prednisolone. They'll buy us time. After the injection, Alice's face began to regain its normal color. Liv commented, "Sir, don't stand there like a statue. Go outside and tell our driver to get the stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We need to try to avoid intubation. Wouldn't want to put a tube in such a little one's trachea." Eleanor N. acted like a robot, automatically. She came to only when they were driving with Vince in the car, sitting on either side of the girl. Alice's breathing was still intermittent, but had noticeably evened out. Vincent didn't take his anxious, sorrowful eyes off the child. And Ellie remembered something else. After that first date, when she successfully passed Latin, their relationship developed rapidly. A week later, they couldn't live a day without each other. They unconditionally liked both sets of parents. They got married after her 4th year of university, moved into Vinny's grandmother's apartment. The lively old lady had rushed off to her younger sister in the countryside, where she became engrossed in growing flowers. Now you couldn't lure her back to the city even with a treat. Ellie and Vince lived soul to soul. Quarrels or arguments? That wasn't them. Always and in everything, complete harmony. The stocky Vincent worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Ellie Bean successfully finished medical institute, planning for residency. Only she couldn't decide on a specialization. She joked, "I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a starched coat, and an ENT doctor with a bunch of shiny instruments looks excellent too." Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma, as if on command, "Now you can," Ellie became pregnant. 9 months later, another stocky guy was born, their son Arthur, their Artie, their love and joy. He developed according to all the rules. As the happy father often joked, "Time to sit," Art sat confidently. "Time to walk," he briskly toddled. Ellie then put medicine aside a little, wanting to spend more time with her son, as if intuition told her, this carefree time wouldn't last long. Trouble knocked on their happy family's door when Arthur was 3 years old. Eleanor's mentor, who always said she had talent, hinted, another 6 months, and no institution would be happy to have her. This profession loves those who constantly improve themselves. Even before that, upon learning of her pregnancy, Eleanor drastically changed her plans. She chose the smallest patients, infants, newborns. She decided to become a neonatologist. She meticulously studied pathologies in tiny babies, spending hours in the pediatric intensive care unit. And then the fervor died down. Artie occupied all her thoughts and time. To return to medicine, Ellie needed to immerse herself in the life of a department where there was a place for a budding pediatrician. Big guy Art went to kindergarten. Vince continued his classes at the section. Everything in their family flowed in the planned course. A couple of months later, Artie's teacher asked Eleanor to stop by after work. She shared her observations and concerns. First, she asked, "Don't you notice anything strange about your son?" Ellie raised her eyebrows in surprise, widening her eyes. "My husband and I work a lot. We see Artie mostly in the evenings, but he seems healthy and cheerful. What concerns you?" "We were preparing for the matinee. The little one's dancing wasn't working out." Arthur did a circle with his partner, suddenly turned pale, and sat down on a chair by himself. "I didn't pay much attention then, but your son started stopping in his tracks more often. It seemed to me that a blue tint appeared around his lips. Yesterday, the pediatrician examined him. She advised showing the boy to a cardiologist." "I'm a doctor myself, a pediatrician. I couldn't have missed anything in my own son," Ellie replied sharply. And to herself she thought, or could I? Without delay, the next day she took Artie to her department. The doctor's verdict was stunning. "Your son has a rare heart defect that appears around 3 or 4 years old. The only salvation is urgent surgery. Otherwise, he won't live another 6 months. His condition will worsen. Such an operation is impossible here. There is experience in Moscow, Germany, Switzerland, Israel." Ellie and Arthur walked home slowly. It seemed to her that the boy would get worse any minute. Vince rushed from the sports school as soon as she called, and she pored over textbooks, notes. It turned out the outcome was 50-50, favorable or fatal. Where to find balance? The cost of the operation in Moscow seemed astronomical. Time flew. Ellie and Vincent couldn't raise the amount. Even selling the grandmother's apartment with her permission and moving to a one-room flat on the outskirts didn't help. When a charitable foundation intervened, things moved forward. The operation and treatment were paid for, tickets were bought, things were packed. Arthur died on the operating table. The scales didn't tip in the right direction. There was no negligence, no mistake, no serious prerequisites, except for the severe illness. Eleanor, as a doctor, understood this, but her heart froze when the surgeon came out and spread his hands. Without words, they all understood. No cry, no sigh, just a tighter embrace in which they stood while their son was being saved under the cold operating lights. They returned home devastated. Ellie kept repeating, "Time is to blame. We lost it while we were raising money. If we had come earlier, everything would have been fine." Then she took retraining courses for emergency medicine. For her, it became important to manage to save at least someone else's child. That's when she said her motto phrase to her husband, "We are always responsible for everything. It's just that some people live their whole lives without understanding this." 2 years after Arthur's death, Vincent brought up the topic of a second baby. She couldn't explain her feelings herself. She didn't want to give birth anymore, to have another child. She wanted to dedicate all her strength and abilities only to children in trouble, suffering, but not her own. Vince resigned himself, didn't mention it again, didn't hint. He was there, painfully dear. And now they were driving side by side with his daughter from some strange, incomprehensible girl. Eleanor N. didn't even want to call her mother mentally. As if in a delirium, one thought dominated. What does her husband have in common with this oddity? On that distant June day, as Vinny wandered through the park alleys, it wouldn't have crossed his mind that on one of the benches, fate awaited him in the form of a girl with luxurious gray-green eyes, more beautiful than any in the world. The pretty person, contrary to his masculine understanding, guided her pen over lips whispering intently, twisted a strand of hair around her finger, wrinkled her nose, chewed a sandwich, washing it down from a bottle, then turned pages again. And she did all this simultaneously, without getting confused. Vince froze, and as pompous as it sounds, died. He fell in love at first sight. His legs carried him to the bench themselves. And then he got flustered and blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She didn't mince words, herself offered to introduce herself, agreed to go to a cafe the next day. In any love story, there are two faces, two participants. If someone had written down Vincent's and Eleanor's memories, they would have been two similar novellas. They understood they loved and wanted to be together. They were close, friendly, understood each other. They lived, waited, raised Arthur. Everything shared, everything 50-50. Together they faced trouble. Their son left, they remained. Against the laws of nature, the elders outlived the younger. That trip to the picturesque resort of Sochi, preparing for the Olympics, was unusual from the start. There were a year and a half left until the Games. The city was buzzing with construction. The coach and team even tested a new hotel and cafe in Krasnaya Poliana, intended for foreigners. Having admired the mountains, swum in the sea, and won, everyone went home happy. When buying tickets, it turned out that many professionals were traveling to Sochi. Tickets became scarce. The coach was forced to buy a ticket in a two-berth compartment. His neighbor turned out to be a girl traveling to a city for a vacation. She also bought her ticket at the last moment. Button-nosed, blue-eyed, giggly. And as for being a little simple-minded, always talking nonsense, well, Vincent wasn't planning to christen children with her. Athletic, with a muscular physique and a serious gaze from his brown eyes, he had always been attractive to women. But this didn't interest him. He was tied to Ellie Bean by shared joys and sorrows, like ropes. He paid little attention to others, even to their attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger. When he entered, she was eating a potato pie, washing it down with cola. She nodded in greeting, introduced herself. Tiffany, I'm going on vacation. I've been painting at sites for almost 9 months without days off. The foreman gave me 2 weeks of rest. Sit down. Why are you frozen? We're traveling for almost a day here. Stunned, Vincent sat down. The train started. The station floated past the window. After 10 minutes, his boys came, started teasing. Boss, maybe we can switch? Such a girl with you, don't disgrace the victory. It was easy with Tiff. She didn't flirt, didn't play games. She treated him to pies, took his sandwich, went for coffee. Some things are expected of women. I'm already 23. I look like a shrimp because of my height. But then we're already respectable. The train glided smoothly. Day turned into inky night. Vincent and Tiffany discussed premieres, stars, Sochi, told a couple of jokes. The conversation didn't flow. They decided to sleep. Vincent leafed through newspapers. Tiffany rustled a detective novel. Boring. Both lay with their backs to their fellow traveler, pretending to be asleep. After half an hour, Vince dozed off. He woke up to hands stroking his shoulders. Don't be scared, brave coach, brutal one. You're too much. It's hard to resist. Vincent flinched, stood up sharply, turned to Tiff. What are you doing? Fellow traveler, I told you I'm married. Or will you have a child with me, Vinny? Or will you never cheat on your wife? Of course, the man grumbled angrily, and inside, a predator's excitement came alive. Tiffany instantly caught the change. Well, and then what happened, happened. They barely spoke in the morning. No, I won't have coffee, thank you. Even the bold Tiffany didn't lift her eyes, as if ashamed. They parted ways in the city. The memories of the night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider it cheating. And then something unforeseen happened. In autumn, Vincent was closing the locker room when the security guard called him. Vince, a girl is looking for you here. Coming down, Vince saw the fellow traveler from Sochi with surprise. She nodded for him to approach and said through clenched teeth, "I've had so many partners, but to get pregnant like this after one night, that's never happened. Listen, coach, abortions are expensive. You'll have to help with money." Vincent couldn't believe his ears. He could be a father again. He would have given half his life for such an opportunity. Grabbing Tiffany by the elbow, he dragged her around the corner to the sports ground. He seated her on the stands, said loudly and clearly, "You will give birth to this child for me, and I will be there. Not your husband, don't hope, but his father. Just you dare harm the baby, you'll regret it." Tiffany resisted, screamed, "Who are you to make me waste my youth on your offspring? Found a surrogate mother? I'll be asked to marry later, and I'll have your baggage." They sat down for negotiations, discussed the terms. Vincent helps financially, comes at the first request. The child's fate will be decided after birth. In return, she maintains a healthy lifestyle for 7 months. They learned it would be a girl after the ultrasound. Tiffany unexpectedly softened. "Didn't want a boy, but a girl. I'll think about keeping her myself or giving her to you as a gift. You were happy, weren't you?" Vince looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be near such a woman? He was preparing for a conversation with Ellie, wanted to tell her everything, confess, but kept postponing it. Let the girl be born, then he would definitely confess. Alice was born quickly, healthy. 5 days later, Vincent picked Tiffany up from the maternity hospital. The lively painter quieted down, treated the baby carefully. Either instinct woke up, or the girl was pretty, quiet, as if she felt the wrongness of her appearance. Dad and Mom don't live together. There's no normal family. 3 months later, Vincent offered Tiffany to formalize the adoption so she could transfer the baby to him and be free. The refusal was sharp. Moreover, Tiffany insisted that he tell his wife nothing. Otherwise, she would cut him off from Alice. At first, Vince was torn. He wanted to involve lawyers, fight for his daughter, watched if Tiff was treating the girl well. There was nothing to find fault with. The master of her trade had even saved a decent amount of money. You couldn't catch her on a material hook. Time passed. Vincent got used to visiting the second home, where Allie met him with joyful squeals. They walked, had lunch like a family. Dad, Mom, daughter. Eleanor was fanatically engrossed in work, taking extra shifts. She didn't pay attention to her husband's absences. But when they were home together, she was almost the same. Kind, affectionate. The tired ambulance slowed down at the reception area of the children's hospital. 2 orderlies carried the stretcher with Alice. Doctors bustled around, reassuring them that the girl's life was not in danger. Eleanor N's crew's mission was complete. They had brought the girl. Vincent stayed with his daughter. Eleanor had to return to the station. Later that evening, her husband would honestly tell her about those events on the train long ago. By then, Ellie would have almost calmed down, surprised that she didn't consider the brief romance a crime. She seemed to feel all of Vincent's longing for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was embodied. Different destinies, different ways the heavens help one find the happiness of fatherhood. After that, everything even started to look funny for them. Eleanor advised her husband what doll to buy for the discharge, bought sweets and gifts. Once she asked, "Vince, why does Alice's mother look so strange?" Vincent explained that Tiffany's appearance metamorphoses had started recently. Neither of them then assumed what the pink dreadlocks and mannerisms would lead to. Tiff fell in love with a new painter. The man called himself a free artist. During breaks, he would paint her portrait, and then paint over it. Tiff was smitten. got the same dreadlocks. He advised the shade. The artist didn't ask her out, didn't look into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't hint at closeness. He lured her with a bohemian spirit, charm, sophistication, visible in every gesture. What wind had brought him to their construction site, Tiff didn't ask. She prayed that the male Mary Poppins wouldn't disappear. Now she imitated her idol in everything. Dressed like him, smoked thin cigarettes, ate like him, rolls, wasabi, wine, moldy cheese. She paid less attention to Alice, pretending to be an ideal mother only when Vincent was around. He wasn't alarmed by the changes. By the New Year holidays, Tiff felt that her love was about to fly away. In between falling into the whirlpool of love, the nomad revealed that he never stayed anywhere longer than 2 to 3 months. He got bored. He dropped out of art school. The urge to change places won. Tiffany rushed after him 2 weeks after melancholy appeared in his eyes. But first, she prepared. She knew that Vincent had no secrets from his wife. She invited both of them to a cafe. Ordering coffee and pastries to sweeten the pill, she didn't beat around the bush. "I've met the man of my life. I'm ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Alice is now superfluous to me. God knows, I wasn't always a bad mother. I'm attached in my own way. Now I want to arrange my personal life. If you want, Vince, draw up the documents. I'll give you my daughter and leave." Ellie was in shock at this offer. She wasn't against Vincent's daughter living with them. But how could a mother abandon a child like that? The image of Artie swam before her eyes. Her heart ached. "If you came back, I would never give you away." Aloud, she said, "We are always responsible for our loved ones. Vince, you haven't even said a word yet, and I'm rushing ahead of everyone. We agree, Tiffany, to welcome your girl into our family. Draw up the documents. We will sign everything." With the adoption, easily bypassing bureaucracy, Vincent and Eleanor quickly adopted Alice. The girl adored her father. Her mother's departure was explained as a necessity, and she quickly found common ground with Aunt Ellie. Crowded but not offended. Now the little apartment echoed with the sound of a little bell voice participating in all affairs. Alice and Dad hung laundry, helping Aunt Ellie. Then the female half-baked pancakes and called the head of the family for tea. The story could have ended here, but it's not for us to decide how fate will dispose. It had prepared new trials. Another crew was supposed to go to the call about the collapsed building. Someone in the heavenly office ordered otherwise. The nurse from the neighboring crew slipped on the station porch. The first frosts had come to the city, and the ice was forgotten. Somewhere near the collapsed house, victims were waiting, and the medic's leg was swelling, clearly a fracture. Eleanor N's crew was urgently redirected to the accident site. As always, the collected Livy, the indispensable Gregory, the focused Ellie. All assembled. Even Olivia didn't argue about riding in the back, but quickly got into the cabin with Greg. No time for arguments. A couple of days ago, Ellie and Leave had a serious talk. They were friends and used informal address, maintaining subordination at work. The doctor started the dialogue, but she wasn't scolding about work, but about Greg. "Don't you have a heart, Liv? The whole station is gossiping that Greg is pining for you, and you're like a stranger. You're good in every way. And a scar only adorns a man." "And what do you suggest, Ellie Bean? He's like a devil at any touch. Am I contagious? He touches and recoils. How should I understand that? And you say he's in love. Lies." Now Olivia was riding next to Greg and involuntarily admired his profile. The scar, cutting across his eyebrow, running down to his beautifully shaped lips, hadn't scared her for a long time. Greg was attractive with that masculine beauty that promised protection. It remained a mystery why he deliberately avoided her. If he loved her, why like this? Greg was afraid to get closer than a meter to Livy. He loved this giggly person too much to offend her with an involuntary display of interest. And now, as soon as Olivia turned away to the window, he would instantly cast a glance at her to admire her unassuming but pretty beauty. When the nurse turned her head, Greg sat straight, looking at the road. A crowd had gathered in front of the house where the third floor of the old building had collapsed. It hummed like 100 bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed by the anxious reports of the rescuers. "Did you hear? A girl was crushed on the first floor. She's screaming in pain. The rescuers can't get through." Hearing this, the slender Eleanor N. commanded, "Olivia, prepare pain relief. I'll try to crawl to the little one." At these words, Greg and Olivia turned around. "No, boss. Until the rescuers give the all clear, the house could collapse." "No time to be afraid," the brave woman replied. "There's a child alone, scared, in pain. Why have an ambulance if it's as slow as a turtle?" With a syringe in her hand, Eleanor N. rushed towards the building where firefighters and emergency responders were working. "Woman, where are you going?" "I'll crawl to the girl, give her an injection. I'm an ambulance doctor." "It's too narrow there. None of our men could get through." "And I'll try." Debris, plaster, paint streaks, dust. Ellie first got on her knees, then crawled, mentally thanking her husband for making her stay in shape. Swimming, jogging. At the end of the crawl space, she saw a girl pinned by a metal door. Her legs stuck out towards the exit, as if the child had been running. She turned around and shouted clearly, "Two thin men can get through here. The girl is pinned by the door, but I'm giving her pain relief." "Don't shout," a whisper followed. "Loud sounds are dangerous." A couple of minutes later, the little one quieted down. Ellie began to push the door with her shoulder. With difficulty, but the massive thing moved. Rustling sounds from behind, and the woman whispered, "The girl is relaxed, limp. Pull her by the legs, and I'll push the door." Together, the work went faster. The men pulled the girl through the labyrinth. The way back didn't seem so unknown. Ellie hesitated for a couple of minutes. Outside, people didn't understand what had happened. A roar. The building began to fold like a house of cards. Only two young guys managed to jump out with the girl in their arms. Eleanor N., the well-known doctor, was buried forever under the debris. Calm, always collected. Olivia screamed hysterically, rushed to Greg, who grabbed her and stroked her head. It seemed to both of them that Ellie Bean had been swallowed by a greedy monster. Lured, swallowed. People bustled around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more was unknown. Ellie's widowed crew stood in the middle of the chaos, tightly embracing. Later, learning that their presence wasn't needed, they went to the car, their arms still linked. They had to go to Vincent to tell him and Alice the bitter news. 2 weeks passed. Greg and Olivia had a new doctor, an elderly pediatrician from the clinic. Silent, stern, qualified. But the nurse and driver felt that the soul had left the crew. Everything was as usual, and yet everything was different. They didn't want to go to work. The day Eleanor N. died, they immediately rushed to her home. Alice was at kindergarten. Vince was packing his bag for training. Olivia had never seen such a reaction to sad news. After their story about Ellie's last minutes, a blackness spread across Vince's face. His eyes had been lively, shining. But now the light went out. His skin turned ash gray. How to find words of comfort? Everything said seemed empty. Olivia and Greg understood that in this scorched desert, they were superfluous. They didn't want to scatter. A thick thread bound this couple, who had witnessed a terrible tragedy. They came to Olivia's apartment together after the shift. It seemed to them that no words were needed to explain how much time had been lost. Olivia prepared food, as if she had done it 1,000 times. Both had a ravenous appetite after the stress. A huge pan of fried potatoes and eggs was eaten in 5 minutes. Before Gregory thought that if Olivia were near, he would pounce like a wolf. Everything happened differently. He felt such tenderness for this woman that he would melt. Greg felt such happiness, as if there had been no long torments of waiting. When Livy fell into a troubled sleep, he couldn't sleep. He checked, wondering if he had imagined it. She, his woman, was sleeping on his shoulder. He was struck by the warmth with which Olivia touched his scar, kissed it, looked into his eyes. Did he like it? She behaved as if a hero, a protector, was next to her. He remembered the disgust on his wife's face after his injury. They didn't say, "I love you," or "I need you." In their story, everything had been said long ago, and now they were simply proving to each other that it wasn't a mistake, that it was worth enduring and waiting for everything to happen exactly like this. In the morning, Olivia said calmly, "Greg, you could go home, pick up your things. My apartment is closer to work and more spacious. Then we'll decide what to do with your place. I'd combine efforts and trade up for something bigger." Greg hadn't known quiet comfort before. With his wife, they lived in constant separations. He felt rootless, cold, as if together, but apart. So he threw himself into work. With Livy, everything was different. He felt a certainty that he was needed and important. That even when he went to the supermarket on an errand, she managed to miss him and met him so warmly, as if he had returned from distant travels. Vincent lived as if in a delirium after Ellie's death. In the morning, he mechanically made sandwiches and coffee, stirring porridge for Allie Pie. The girl became his salvation, his outlet, his light. In his free time, he couldn't stay in the tiny apartment. Both his and Ellie's parents had deteriorated sharply after the grief, turning into helpless old people. Both families sought solace in working the land. They fanatically planted everything, finding oblivion. They tried not to think. They didn't take their granddaughter in. They couldn't cope with the lively, curious girl who asked 100 questions a minute. On weekends, Vincent took his daughter on hikes. They would go to the river, pitch a tent, wander through the steppe, gathering wildflowers for Ellie's grave. On the way back, they always stopped at the cemetery. Vince would sit on the bench and talk for a long time with his departed beloved. He told her how the week went, boasted about his trainees' successes. Ellie from the photograph looked with her gray-green eyes and smiled that smile with which she loved to declare her motto, "We are responsible for everything. If you commit, see it through to the victorious end." After the cemetery, Vince felt a little better for a while. He also noticed that carefree laughing women irritated him. If he came across one, he would watch her go and think with malice, "Interesting, dear. Would you step under the ruins if a strange child was crying there?" Annoyance enveloped him. Why were they alive? And Ellie Bean was gone forever. Alice grew up all at once, turning into a wise little old woman. She didn't fuss after kindergarten. Buckwheat porridge with sausages was the best food. The Cinderella fairy tale was like a new discovery. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone. She would ask, "Are you tired? Should I turn on the kettle? I'll take your socks." She lost her second mother but didn't ask questions. They were comfortable in their orphaned solitude, understanding each other with half a word. Sometimes in the evenings, Greg and Olivia would drop by with pastries. They would have tea parties. They remembered Ellie with light sadness. All four loved her. Everyone missed her. Vincent desperately wanted to move far away, where everything didn't remind him of the past. But where to find a new team? And his wife's grave was here, the old folks nearby. The desire didn't align with reality. They decided to mark the anniversary of Eleanor N's death at a cafe. Colleagues took care of everything. Vincent, Alice, and the parents were brought to a ready-made celebration. Greg and Olivia had recently gotten married. They didn't delay. Their family was expecting an addition. They moved into a new apartment, buying it with the money from selling their old ones. Many warm words were said about Ellie at the table. No one wanted to leave. Even Vince's parents wanted to take the girl for a couple of days. They missed her. Having seen off the guests, Vince walked home through that same park. The same bench, the same alleys. Some group was having fun. 3 young men surrounded a girl, not letting her leave. Vincent's eyes darkened. The victim was a copy of young Ellie Bean. Thin, with her hair, clutching a handbag. The guys grinned predatorily, tightening the circle. Vince quickened his pace. "Hey guys, don't you think the lady doesn't want to talk?" One loosened his grip, turned and hissed. "Mister, move along. We'll sort things out with our friend here ourselves." A cold wave of fury ran through Vincent's body. It was important for him to save this girl, not let them mock her. Even if they knew each other, even if she wasn't in danger, it was important for him to rescue her and take her away. Looks like the quick-witted uncle didn't understand. "Go another way, random passerby. We're locals here, and you're surplus." Vincent looked at the girl, despair in her green eyes. She was silent, but her gaze begged for help. Vince couldn't be mistaken. She was uncomfortable. "The girl is coming with me," he issued an ultimatum, "or you'll regret our paths crossed." "Just look at this." One stepped away, started pacing near Vince. "Doesn't understand the first time. Cheeky." The guy pulled out a knife, steel glinting. "How do you like this argument, knight who decided to save a lady? How do you prefer it? A tickle to your throat? Or shall we check if our beauty likes games?" Vince, who often visited the cross-training practitioners of martial arts, wasn't afraid of attacks. Now it was important to him that they didn't touch her, the copy of Ellie Bean. The guys dropped their victim, who froze like a statue, and started circling from all sides. This turn of events only spurred Vince on. He had drunk a couple of shots. The rest was done by hatred for the scum who considered themselves masters in this park, his and Ellie's park. How much older was he? About 10 years, no more. Almost the same generation. But in the opponent's eyes, there was so much cruelty, a craving for lawlessness, that it was beyond all bounds. The fight was sudden. The guy with the knife immediately seriously scratched his shoulder. The strongest one smiled, trying to win morally. The girl stood aside, mouth agape. "Shoo!" Vince shouted at her. But the young woman didn't give up. She shook her head. "I won't leave you alone. They've been harassing me for a long time. They caught me alone. We study at the university. Boys from the elite. And I'm from the orphanage, like a red flag. They're interested in what life was like in childhood. We didn't abandon our own. I'll be here." Vincent was distracted, took a couple of blows to the ribs. Something cracked. Fracture, he thought with annoyance. The guy with the knife decided to amuse himself differently. He jumped up from behind, pressed the blade to her cheek. "So you say, Kitty, you don't abandon your own? And if I tickle your throat, will you run?" The girl, previously in a state of suspended animation, didn't faint this time. She turned around. A trickle of blood ran down her cheek. She shouted, "How you've annoyed me at university, you creeps. Without your daddies and mummies, you're nobody. An empty space. What can you do yourselves? Take away your cars, trinkets, cards. What do you know about surviving in a wild pack? No one expected such a response. The guys went wild, their faces darkened. Putting away the knife, he joined his friends. They surrounded Vincent with a mass of bodies. He didn't even remember how he pushed the supposed leader. He did a somersault and fell backward. He hit his head on the curb. A ruby spot of blood spread under his head. Vince, who had taken athletes to the first aid station so many times, immediately knew things were bad. He placed a finger on his neck. There was no pulse. The rest was a blur. The girl came to herself first. "Ambulance, police, nobody move!" The guys frantically pulled out their phones, calling parents, services. Vince sat on the curb next to the guy. He thought frantically, "Alice is at the parents. I'll be detained. What about the girl?" He quickly beckoned the student. "What's your name? I need help." "Faith, speak." "I'm Vincent. Here's a note with the address, keys, phone numbers of my friends Gregory and Olivia. My daughter is with my parents. Pick her up and give her to them. They'll take care of her." When the police, ambulance, and a crowd of people arrived, Vincent was calm. Never say never. Apparently it was his turn. Look how many important gentlemen had arrived, giving orders. He was lucky they took him to the car right away. Otherwise, the dogs surrounding the deceased's father would have finished him off on the spot. Faith hovered near Vince. She managed to show the ambulance her cut neck to get a certificate. She chattered to the operatives, the investigator. They were all brought to the police station together. They took his documents and phone. While they were dealing with him, Faith ran off and made some calls. Meeting Vince's gaze, she gave a thumbs up. The mechanism for caring for his daughter was in motion. She turned out to be a desperate firecracker. At the trial, she presented everything in such vivid colors that the rich relatives paled. She found witnesses that the trio had been harassing her for a long time. She was respected in her group. They were not liked. The picture for the victim turned out to be not the most flattering. Undoubtedly, Vincent didn't mean to harm the boy. It was a cruel boomerang. It just happened that way. He was given 5 years in a general regime colony for exceeding the limits of self-defense. Faith's participation helped the judge make an optimal decision. The prosecution had insisted on 8 years. Vince didn't know how Greg and Olivia managed to arrange it with guardianship, but Alice was given to them for the duration of his sentence. During the investigation, their baby Benny was born. The ambulance crew had connections. They saved the children of officials. When Olivia was allowed a visit, she reassured Vince, "Don't worry. Alice is fine with us. You and Ellie are not strangers to us. I'll write to you about her. We'll come for a visit when they allow it. You're in the neighboring region. It's not far. And tell me, what should I do about your little tale?" Faith visits Alice, brings toys, asks to pick her up from kindergarten, take her for a walk, go to the cinema. I didn't think the girl would turn out to be such a friend. We met tragically, of course. She actively defended you, testified. You never know how a little one will behave in extreme conditions. She's no pushover. Lord Vince, how naive you are. She fell in love with you at first sight. Your knightly behavior, your protection, your looks. And you were wrong about her being a little one. She got into university after college. She's 23. There's a 9-year difference between you. She looks young because of her height and fragility. She has a great character. Take a closer look. You can't bring Ellie back. And you and Alice have a lot of good things ahead of you. You deserve it. The guard leading the prisoner after the visit didn't understand why this stocky guy was smiling. How could he know that Vincent was thinking that perhaps there would still be happiness in his life if this lively person with green eyes waited for him? Love comes in different forms. Some exchange it for copper pennies, while others remain the chosen one without fear or reproach. It depends on who gets lucky.